The end, I was trying to stress this situational spirituality, which amounts to attentiveness to God throughout the day, which means that we're trying to let life write the agenda, in which we're using the events of the day as the catalyst and the grist for prayer. That's the situational side. And then I was saying, so I want Diane to do more of that, and maybe pray at good times throughout the day, just brief prayers that are going to help her. But then the other side of it is to have something structured. The spiritual tradition has been to have a regimen, something fixed that we do, and that's supposed to bring together the two, that's supposed to illumine the situational. I could put the problem this way. I remember a priest, after I gave a talk like this, come out to me and say, you know, in my life, when I go to bed at night, I sort of examine my conscience, and I look at how I did with my prayer life. Did I say my prayers? Was I attentive at Mass? And so on. And then I would look at my ministerial work. Was I sensitive to people? And did I show a caring attitude, compassion, and so on? But the idea that the two should fruitfully interact never occurred to him. He was a very bright and good pastor. You could put it this way. Someone might say, well, my regimen is to say the rosary every day. And I'd say, well, does that help you? Well, not discernibly, but it's what I do. But it's what I do. That's my spiritual regimen. So what I'm proposing here in this spirituality is that we look consciously for ways that would bring the two together, so that they mutually interact. So if we're going to pick a regimen, like saying the rosary each day, or going to Mass 3 times a week, or of reading the Scriptures every day, or meditating, or whatever, we ought to look at 2 criteria. One is whether I can do it most days. In other words, to pick a regimen and then at the end of a month to say I did it twice doesn't help much, because we're just going to feel guilty. So we ought to pick something, no matter how busy we are, we can actually do it. And secondly, that it illumines the situational. So it would help us to be alert to God's presence in everyday life. One way I would try to think of picking a regimen, picking a spiritual discipline that we try to do regularly, either daily or weekly or whatever. I know in my own life, my regimen is primarily a mantra meditation. I mentioned that before. I try to do that each day. And I find that if I do it, it makes a difference in my presence to people. So if I remember to pray for you during that mantra meditation, then I will do a better job of interacting and of catching the positive energy you send my way. I will be more attuned to it if I made that part of my mantra meditation. So it's almost, in that case, discernible. You know, it is, you can almost feel the difference it would make. And I know people who, some people do yoga in the morning and then they spend some time reflecting on what has happened, and then they say, well, I'm more attuned throughout the day to what is happening. So the point is to put the situational and the structured spirituality together so they fruitfully interact. Let me just see if there's questions that up to this point. I haven't really had much time for that. People want to ask me anything or push me in a direction, or yes?
We're all here after lunch, and some of us.
Yes, I think that what comes out of this is what I might call a Catholic sense of leisure that we would like to develop. A Catholic leisure. The problem, I believe, in our culture is that the qualities we bring to work, like efficiency and productivity, getting things done, worried about the bottom line, sort of a heightened intensity about it all that many jobs demand or raising children demands and so on, gets carried over into what we think of as the leisure time. So the example of this would be going on a vacation and just rushing around. We got to get this and do that and run here and go there and see that. It's like doing the Prado Museum in 2 hours, and we did it. We got through it. It's the same carried over into any of our non-work activities like the Mass. Sort of make it happen, get it done, and get out sort of thing. So I see that as one of the great problems for us is figuring out a way to change gears so that leisure is not work. Work has as its goal productivity. We're trying to get something done. Leisure doesn't. Leisure is an end in itself. It's to have its own inner meaning. It's non-efficient, non-productive in that way. So you could think of ways that you might try to do that. One is take the watch off at Mass. Sometimes we've had our whole congregation do that. Everybody take their watch off today. So periodically everyone's going like this, That's a symbol of saying, I'm not thinking about time. We're here to worship. It doesn't matter how long it takes. The question is, are we in tune with it? Or going to a museum and look at only 2 paintings in the hour you're going to be there. To spend a half hour with each one, or that's overblown, 15 minutes with 4 of them or something, so that you have time to drink it in and see what it's all about. In our area, I use this example. Go see a minor league baseball game. Go see the Mud Hens instead of driving madly to Detroit to see the Tigers play. Just go out and enjoy it. Do simpler kinds of things. Take vacations that are really recreating. Spend leisure time doing things that renew the spirit. Some people might want to veg out in front of the TV as the best thing to do, or watch soaps or watch primetime television or whatever as a good way to unwind. But the question would be, is it somehow doing us good? So we ought to find leisure that works for us. That's almost contradictory, I guess, but leisure that isn't continuation of work, that's got a whole different feel to it. Maybe put on different clothes or something, or as a signal to ourselves that we're into something else here. Even reading the Bible, we have the traditional way we call Lectio Divina. I often find myself suggesting that to people instead of saying, well, I'm going to read a chapter a day or something. You read until something captures you, and then you think about it, reflect on it, keep going until it exhausts itself. So you might read 1 verse a day, or half a verse, or 5 verses, or whatever. But that has a different feel to it, Lectio Divina, than saying, boy, I'm going to read all of Matthew during the first week of Lent. And then you're into productivity. Yeah, sure. Not getting anything out of it. So the great problem I see is work is what dominates us for the most part. It dominates our thought patterns and our mode of interacting and so on, and we carry it over to leisure. So we got to change that. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, yep.
It's not a question that's thematically...
My brother David? Yeah. Yes. My brother David was born with Rh factor, 6 years younger than me, never functioned in any normal sense. The only responses I ever saw from him was my father every night would bring home a little piece of chocolate for him. And somehow he had some awareness he liked that chocolate. He couldn't hold his own head up and so on. He lived for 9 years. My note says that he brought out of my parents love and probably gave me a lot of my feeling for life. He's probably one of the reasons that I ended up studying with Ronner, because somehow built into the experience of having a brother like that and watching my mother take care of him, my father gave me sort of what I'd call a sober sense of life. And I remember when I was looking at different theologians as who I wanted to settle down with or study in depth, what finally appealed to me about Rahner was what he called his wintry piety, as opposed to like a springtime, optimistic, upbeat kind of piety. Rahner is a sober realist, and that ended up appealing to me, and I'm sure a lot of that came out of my family experience with my brother. But my point was that my brother, although he never said a word, brought out of my parents a deep love and a selfless giving that was prime example. I draw a lot on my mother's sense of what I call self-acceptance. My mother told me that when my brother was born, up till then everything was fine in her life. She had 2 healthy children and she's on a roll and all. And she told me how at that point it was clear to her she had 2 choices. You're either going to be angry about that or blame yourself or feel guilty, rail against God or kick your feet or be some negative response, or you could accept it and get on with it. And my mother chose to accept it. Rahner says that the key to the spiritual life is self-acceptance. Acceptance. But oh, how difficult that is to achieve. And I saw my mother achieve it, not perfectly, but to a high degree, and it always touched me. There was that hard realism. One of the best things my mother ever said to me, I wanted to go play baseball in the other field. All I ever wanted to do was be a Major League Baseball player. And they had to go through one neighborhood to get over the other neighborhood I was going to play, and there were these tough guys there that were going to beat me up and so on. And I went to my mother with this problem, thinking my mother will get me over there. And my mother said, "Young man, you want to play ball over there? Get yourself over there." Now, no mother can say that these days. They'd feel guilty or something, the kids would get beat up or something. But I thank my mother for that. In a million ways she said that. That's how it is. Life, there's a grittiness about it, and you have to fight your way through it. You want to play ball over there? Get yourself over there. I'm not holding your hand. And geez, I just thank her for that. But I mean, I know you say that to women today, young women raising kids, and they don't like that. It's a negative message to them. I appreciated it. Just one more story while I'm on that about this gritty realism. My mother is 87, still alive. She has horrible osteoporosis and still drives a car and all that. But when she was in her late 70s, early 80s, I took her out to dinner one night, and I noticed she was favoring her arm, and I think it was her left arm. And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" She says, "Well, I got a little pain in there," and so on. I said, "Well, I could see how she had." I said, "We got to go to a doctor," and she didn't want to, but I took her anyway. And the doctor x-rayed, says, "Why, heavens, your mother's got a severe fracture of her elbow. I can't understand how she's going on here." And he put it in a thing and like in a soft cast and everything. And as I was going out, the doctor says, "Hey, your mother's going to need care 24 hours a day. I mean, you got to figure this out." I said, "Geez, how am I going to do this? Trying to figure this out." So we get home, and I said, "Mom, the doctor says you need care. We got to figure out what to do." And she says, "Well, let's see." So she went in the house and she took out a jar of mayonnaise or something and figured out how to open it. She then went into the bathroom and handled that. She says, "Come on, let's get in the car." She got in the driver's side, backed the car out, drove out and around the block, out onto a busy street, came back in driveway and said, "I guess I won't need 24 hours a day care, will I?" That was her graphic way of making the point. All of that gives me my existential feel for wintry piety. That's Rahner. That's Rahner in everyday terms. And I know my mother got that fundamental idea from accepting the fact that her third child was Rh factor and wouldn't function, and cared for him. Oh, it's an extensive answer to that. We were going to do a second topic, weren't we? Which had to do with the question of dealing with change. So I thought of this morning's as being dealing with time, right? And problems of busyness, of half-hearted living, and so on. So now I'm thinking about time. And my protagonist in my short composite vignette I will call Tom. Now Tom is facing the fact that he is going to be retiring soon. And it's anxiety producing for him. He's not sure, well, what is he going to do with himself? He's not sure that he and his wife can actually be together that long in the house. Will she let him just stay there? You know, I remember a friend of mine who Dan would know saying, he retired and was in a house, and his wife eventually said, look, either you're going out to get a job or I am. One or the other. So this is anxiety producing for Tom. And as he begins to look at this, he thinks back over his career and his life, and he thinks of all the changes he went through. He remembers when he went to college and left the settled and familiar environment of high school and came to the University of Toledo. And here's this, 20,000 people running around and all that. And it was hard for him because it took him a while to find his niche, where he fit and how he was going to handle things. And that was sort of traumatic for him. And he thinks of when he took his first job, the interview, the anxiety around it. Would he be able to measure up, and could he impress people, and would they want to hire him, and so on? Could he find steady work? And then throughout his work career, he worked for 4 different companies. Changed, and each time there was sort of a stress level, and he thought it was a better move, and so on. Sometimes Tom says that throughout his life, he's been married to 5 different women. And they're all named Anne. And he thinks what a different person she was when they were first married, and it was just romantically wonderful, and it was so beautiful. And then he married another wife when the first children came. And boy, she put a lot of attention on those kids. Amazing. And he often felt like, where did he fit into this whole picture? She wasn't that interested in much bed activity either, and that didn't thrill him. So then he had to figure out how to adjust to that. And then when the kids left home, he married another woman, and they tried to figure out how to be a duo again, because they communicated mostly through their kids up till that point. They talked to each other about the kids, but there was never talk to one another about them, their relationship. And then he's looking at now another woman by the name of Anne that he's married to as he's moving towards retirement. He's had to learn so many new things. He felt inadequate at work when the whole computer revolution happened, and these young guys came in and they were whizzes and they knew all about this stuff, and he didn't have a clue. And he had to really fight his way just to get a minimal knowledge till he could sort of pretend like he knew what he was doing and hold his own with these young people. So Tom, when he thinks about his life, it's like one transition after another, one trauma of change after another. He mastered them, but they were always anxiety-producing for him. And it was always a question of uprooting and starting over, and he longed in his heart for just to have solidity, to have continuity, to have something that held together for him. And yet life just kept propelling him in all these changes. Now he's looking at a big one, moving towards retirement. A lot of that for him bears on his religious outlook. He has a feeling that retirement could be positive in terms of giving him more time for prayer and reflection and so on. So I put Tom out there as exemplar of the kind of world we live in and the changes that challenge us. And as I did before, I want to try to analyze that in larger perspectives. And I put it in this way, that we are living through clearly one of the greatest transition periods in the history of the human race. It's really hard to imagine a bigger transition than we have known in this time. Primarily, that's true because it's an actual change of consciousness, the way we think, paralleled, it seems to me, only by a couple of other events in history, that is, the invention of the alphabet and the invention of the printing press. So that the invention of the computer and television, electronic age, it hasn't just made like a little bit of difference. It's changed the way we think, the way we process information, the way we function. Now, the other night, I was unable to turn on the television set in the staff dining room. I tried for 15 minutes to turn that television set on, unsuccessfully. And then I went out and found an expert, one of the students, who turned it on immediately. And it struck me that this is the first time in the history of the world that I think this has happened. That is, where the younger generation knows more than the older generation about something significant. I mean, I could be wrong about that. But that's how it's striking me. Almost always before, I would have taught the young guy how to do something new, instead of having 5-year-olds program my VCR or something. So that is a change that is momentous, that it is hard to imagine what that all means. What confidence do young people have in a priest who can't turn his television set off? So there's new kinds of questions. And what does it do to have to learn from younger people things about life like that? So that's one way to begin to think about this tremendous transition period in which we live. So I want to detail that in terms of the shifts that have occurred in our own lifetime. We are now in what we'll call a post-colonial period. Columbus, of course, created the modern colonial world. The Western powers dominated everything else. And now we are in a post-colonial world. Cultures have their own way of doing things. We no longer think or can impose our will in every way that we want from a Western perspective on the world. It is a post-denominational world. In other words, the old world was clearly divided into Protestants and Catholics, or Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Anglicans, and Catholics. That's no longer the breakdown that we find in our society. I'll just tell you a little vignette again on that. There was a young man who worked for us at our university parish. Each year we have a student who gives a year of service to our parish. Thus may be given up, in the case of our pharmacy majors, about $60,000 a year for that year, or they give up a year of graduate school, a major commitment. They work with us for very little wages, and they're extremely helpful to us. Well, one young man did this with me. He was a graduate student in history, and his wife was studying to become a doctor. And Paul did a great job. He did a lot of research for me and helped me out and so on. And after 1 year, he wanted to do a second year, so he said, okay. So he then gave a second year of service, and he organized things, helped with our liturgy and everything. And during his second year, he came to me and he said, I got really good news for you. I'm going to go to the seminary. Paul, that's wonderful. You make a wonderful pastor. You go in the seminary. Good. And I'm thinking, does Paul know something I don't know? And so Paul says to me, yeah, would you write a letter of recommendation for me? Paul, I said, all you've done for me, I'd be happy to do whatever I can for you. Paul, by the way, what seminary are you going to? Oh, I'm going to the Lutheran Seminary in Columbus. His wife was at an internship in Columbus. That's what it means to live in a post-denominational world. The point of the story is Paul never batted an eye. Paul never said, is that a problem for you? Or he never said, what do you think about it? Or anything. He's going to Lutheran Seminary. In fact, he's just about finished there now. That old institutional loyalties, the old way the world clearly broke up into Catholic, Protestant kind of thing, in the minds of our young people is broken down. I had a wedding not long ago of two people. They were some of our best parishioners, collegians, and they were there for Mass every week, and they were serious about the faith. They were serious about preparing for the wedding. I started talking to them about if they moved to another place. They went in some other city and were looking around, and they didn't find a Catholic church they really liked, and they gave me strong hints that if they couldn't find a good Catholic church in that new town, they would go to some Protestant church that nourished them the way they wanted it. These were the best of our people. That's what it means to be a post-denominational world. The world is more fluid. It creates many difficulties. The world's post-industrial. Many of our people are preparing for a different kind of jobs and so on. It's post-Cold War. We're the only superpower now. We've got to figure out what to do with our power in the world. The world is post-patriarchal, and we're still trying to figure out what that means. That means you don't use sexist language at Mass. You encourage with spirituality the use of inclusive language for all music printed in this program. That's a post-patriarchal statement. We live in a world, where women want equal opportunities. They make 2/3 for similar work, and they don't like that. And so it's a world in which we're trying to figure out how men and women relate on some basis of equality and not patriarchy. And I suppose it's a negotiable thing. I remember dealing with a young couple there, and we were talking about dividing up domestic chores. Now, most of the young people I deal with talk about equality in all phases. They talk about partnership. They want equality in marriage, and both males and females do that. So I'm talking to this couple, and they're giving me this whole line, and I said to Terry, well, what do you think, how's this domestic chores going to get broken down? She says, I know realistically it probably will be more like 75-25, me doing a 75. And Doug pipes up, she said to me, sort of as an aside, you think she'd settle for 12 and a half? So we're like negotiating. We're trying to find out. What can you do at the work site? How can we interact? How can males and females interact? What's acceptable behavior? Is there any way to flirt anymore without being accused of sexual abuse? That would be a great loss to the culture, that flirting couldn't go on. We're trying to figure out, how you would do that without getting a lawsuit or something. How are marriages going to work like this? So we're in all of these areas. What I'm saying is that we're in a post-something, but we don't know what it is. That's the great problem in a way. That's why in my book I use the word postmodern. That's a commonly used word these days, and no one knows what it means, and that's why I like it. We're moving towards a postmodern culture, and that's saying we don't know. So in one sense, that's a change. That's heavy. On the other hand, it's an opportunity. It's sort of fun to figure out how men and women can relate in a post-patriarchal age? I mean, it's an interesting question. It's challenging. It's got a zest to figuring it out, how we would relate to one another in a way different from previous generations have done that. So that's this creation of this postmodern world. Now, in a postmodern world, a lot of absolutes break down. One of the forerunners of the postmodern world is the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And he wrote The Gay Science in about 1881. And in that book, he has the parable of the madman. And in the madman parable, as some of you remember, the madman comes into the marketplace. And he's in this marketplace where people like don't believe. And he comes in there and he says, "Where is God?" And they mock him. "Where is God? What happened? You lose him? Looking for God, are you?" They make fun of him. And the madman says, "No, I haven't lost him. I'll tell you what has happened. God is dead, and we have killed him." And then the madman says, "And now that we killed God, now the earth is unchained from the sun. And now we are passing through a dark and breathless night. And now we don't know up from down." And then he goes on to say that God has been buried in the churches. The churches are the tomb of God, the tombs of God. In other words, they're complicit in this murder of God. That's a powerful kind of statement of postmodernity. In other words, Nietzsche understood, like few others, that when you took away the linchpin of the whole thing, you take away the fundamental belief in God, the prime absolute that holds the whole thing together, you got chaos. Now the earth is unchained from the sun. And of course, in this changing world, that's been a big part of it, this enlightened attack upon the deity. So I'm trying to give, I suppose, a feeling for this breakup. See, the modern world was characterized by optimism. We're going to make the world better. Humans create problems. We're going to solve them. Reason, the Enlightenment. Voltaire said, "Smash the infamous thing." And by that he meant the church. Smash the infamous thing, the church, because that's getting in our way. That's dehumanizing us. That's stopping progress. Smash the church, and then we humans, we philosophers, can get on to figure out how to make a better world. That was the Enlightenment. And it was optimistic. Reason can solve any problem. And that optimism carried on through the 19th century, and it was part of our U.S. outlook. And then came World War I, and all of that got smashed in Europe. We lost that optimistic mood. And then World War II, and then the literature, like the existentialist literature that came out, pessimistic. Sartre's play, No Exit, Hell is Other People. Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Here's how life is. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to take the rock, put it up to the top of the mountain, only to have it fall down again. Then he had to go down, get it, push it up again, and do that forever. He puts forward Sisyphus as the absurd hero, waiting for Godot. Beckett's play, just waiting. God, what are we waiting for? Not even sure what we're waiting for. God never comes. Godot doesn't come. All of that sort of existential angst that was very typical of Europe. So my point is that when the modern world breaks down, we got troubles. We don't know what to replace it with. And when the linchpin, the absolute that holds it all together is questioned, then you got real chaos. Just to complete that cultural analysis, that in the United States, it wasn't like that. People weren't that much into Sartre and Camus and Beckett and all that stuff, we remained optimistic. Where World War I and World War II in Europe were disasters, for us, they were in some ways triumphs, the victory of democracy over the forces of evil in the world. Our soldiers came back from World War II heroes of having saved the world for democracy. And so it gave us a continuing optimistic spirit here. We can do anything. We can take a man and put him on the moon and bring him back, said President Kennedy. We can create a Peace Corps. We can solve any problem. We will pay any price, bear any burden to solve the problems of the world. And then in 1963, in Dallas, that optimism was punctured. Chaos invaded Camelot. Kennedy's Camelot. Chaos invaded Camelot. And I would submit that nothing's been the same in the U.S. since. And even for our young people here, the assassination of Kennedy is ancient history. They don't know where they were then. Older people remember where we were. I was teaching the 5th grade. All remember where we were when that happened. It was such a decisive and striking event. And then a whole series of things, Vietnam and Watergate and terrorism and random killings, drive-by shootings, all things that just are chaotic, that you can't control, and that are terrible evil forces out there that are bugging us. And it shatters optimism, let's put it that way. It creates a certain darker mood, a somber mood is created in the culture as part of this transition from the modern world. The idea that we can solve any problem, reasoning the Senate, we're sitting here with a racist problem that we haven't been able to solve, and it continues to fester, and we make a little progress, and it seems we go backward, and it just seems intractable. Healthcare, what the heck are we going to do with it? Who's got a plan to work all this out? Interesting thing, a survey of young people, collegians. When they're asked, are they sort of personally optimistic about life, will they do well? The answer is high percentage yes. And if you ask them, how will the economy do? Not well. How will the country go? Not well. The young people are pessimistic. Will Social Security be there for them? High percentage of young people don't think so. So you get this odd ambivalence as we move into through this new age, where people are saying, the young people say, I'm personally optimistic they're going to make it despite all this bad stuff that's going on. Now that is not the most sophisticated viewpoint, but it is, I think, represents the ambivalence in the heart of our young people. All of that by way to try to put into context Tom's problems. The anxiety he feels is the anxiety of the age. It's in the world. It's built into the world as we know it. And we have to figure out our ways to manage all of that. In one area, the change seems to me to be complete and overwhelming, and we can name it. And that is, we are in the electronic age. My student said they're going to put on my tombstone, he never adjusted. He never adapted. You know? He's sitting there writing a book on a yellow pad. Do you believe that? He sits there on a yellow pad and writes. We've seen him. Unbelievable. How Neanderthal can you get? No, so there's a divide in the world. It comes out at every wedding that I'm at. Every wedding, you see that the world's divided into two kind of people. Very clear. There's some people who are at the wedding who want the music turned down so they can talk. So they can talk. There are others at the wedding who want the music turned up so they can vibrate, so they can get into it. You know? It's a divide. I mean, it's incredible. It's half facetious, but, you know, it does speak to this electronic age. It's a different world in which we live.
This is the conclusion of side 1. To listen to side 2, fast forward the tape to the end and turn it over.
One at the beginning, but it's a familiar one, so it's really a test to see who laughs and who doesn't. It's the one about the guys walking on the beach, and he finds the bottle, and opens the bottle, and a genie comes out. This genie is all-powerful. He says, I can do anything. I can handle anything at all. Whatever you want, you have the one wish. And the guy says, very social justice-minded fellow. He says, what I'd like to do is get the situation in Bosnia straightened out. So they get out a map, and they look at all the component parts and everything, and the genie scratches his head. He says, geez, he says, I don't know. He says, very complicated. He says, do you have another wish? And the guy says, yeah. He says, I've been married 25 years now, he says, and some of the bloom has gone off this thing. He says, what I'd really like to do is to get back to the delight and sexual pleasures that we had at the beginning, so it could be ecstatic like it was at the beginning of the marriage. And the genie stops, scratches his head, and he says, could I see that map again? Well, the joke makes a point about sexuality, a very mysterious matter. Sex is a mysterious thing. It's an enigma. It's part of our very being. Second Vatican Council said that we are an enigma to ourselves. We're mysterious creatures. And so sexuality being so woven into who we are and what we are about, it's not surprising that it is hard to understand, that it's got an ultimately mysterious character to it. Well, the person who would say that they can figure this all out would be like the person who thinks that they know how to solve the baseball strike and get it started next week or something. So it's a difficult kind of problem. It's a matter, as I say, of searching for meaning more than techniques. I mean, I presume people come to a lecture like this not interested specifically in the question of plumbing, but or techniques, or what Dr. Rubin had to say in his book, but it is a matter of searching for some deeper meaning in the whole sexual area. I'll start with a story, a composite kind of story, which I will call this guy Gus. And so when you figure out why I call him Gus, then you can stop me. But Gus, growing up in his early teenage years, he started masturbating, like most boys his age, and he was a Catholic, and that bugged him. And he felt bad about it. He used to go to confession and say he wasn't going to masturbate anymore, and then he'd go out and do it again. So that was very confusing to him. When he was in high school, in his senior year, he had a girlfriend, and there was a little bit of necking and petting that went on, but no intercourse ever happened. But even that was hard for him to manage. He could feel this tremendous drive inside of him, this sexual drive. He really didn't know how to handle that or what to do with it, and he was quite fearful of it. And when he came to the university, in a very odd set of circumstances, got involved with a non-traditional student who happened to be married. And as a matter of fact, that's where he had his first sexual encounter and first sexual experience. And he saw this as really sort of making it. He had made it with a married woman. This gave him a great sense of power and control. He really thought it made a man out of him to have made it with this married woman. And after a while, as a matter of fact, this woman quit her position and moved away, and the young man, that relationship broke up. It really didn't bug him all that much. But then he got involved in another relationship with a young woman more his own age. And in that relationship, things seemed different. He really liked her a lot, and he had hopes of this relationship working out in some way. But he had a lot of problem relating to her because, again, the strength of his sexual drive, it was all now new and different. It wasn't like the power relationship he had with the married woman. It was had a different feel to it. He wanted it to be more than that, and he had a heck of a time of trying to figure that out. In fact, in some stages of the relationship, he was impotent in trying to relate sexually, something that had never happened to him before. And all through this period, he kept masturbating and having all kinds of sexual fantasies and so on. So this is Gus's dilemma. Gus puts his dilemma this way. How can I be sexual and still be Catholic? That's the way it comes across to Gus. How can I be sexual? How can I deal with a sexual drive of mine and still maintain my Christian principles? I mean, what am I going to do? Be running to confession every other day? And, I mean, how am I going to handle this? And it strikes him as a supreme dilemma in life. No real way around this. Well, some people know why I called him Gus. That's short for Augustine. And the great shaper of the tradition, the one often accused of having put Gus today in today's world into the problem he's got because of the way Augustine shaped our outlook on sexuality and so on. I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just in one place in the notes it says Augustine revisited. I just want to try to put Augustine in a little bit of context. Augustine himself was a man of his times. In that time, the Stoic philosophy said about the only way you could justify sexual pleasure was in marriage and is to procreate children. That was the given ethos of the time. That's just the way people thought about it. That's what sex was for. The only way you could justify that great delight and pleasure was to say you were going to produce children, and Augustine shared that. It's commonly said that Augustine had a mistress. Well, the woman that he lived with for 14 or 15 years, who he left nameless as trying to protect her reputation in ways, was really more like a common law wife. And during that time, Augustine was not promiscuous. He was faithful to her. And he said at the time when it broke up, and it broke up because of his mother and arranging another marriage for him, it said it tore his heart up, made him bleed, because he cared about this woman. So the common statement, Augustine simply, slept around and had a mistress and all that, would miss part of the point of all of that. He was perhaps more faithful in that relationship than one might have imagined, or the way the story is commonly told. He had to delay his next marriage for 2 years, and he did take another mistress at that point. And he said at that time he was in the grip of lust, and that he didn't handle that relationship very well. So Augustine is the one who gave us the idea that sexual pleasure in the Christian tradition could only be justified in order within marriage and to produce children. And of course, that's been the shaping influence all the way through our history. Augustine is the great theologian and the most influential theologian who ever lived. He gave us a rather negative kind of outlook on life and on sexuality. Well, that has raised the claim, and Gus might be part of this, that says, well, the way, especially Catholics, and I know not everyone here is Catholic, but I speak sort of out of that. I think Protestants in the Puritan tradition could jump onto this in various ways as well. But the idea has been, therefore, that there's this negative, repressed kind of outlook within Catholic circles. Well, we now know a lot more about sex than we knew even 1 year ago. Tremendous advances just in the last year because of the important books published. One of those books is Sex The Catholic Experience by Andrew Greeley. And with Greeley, now, we have to place Andrew Greeley. Andrew Greeley is a priest. He's a sociologist. He writes novels. Some people think they're racy novels. And he's the one who wrote that very important article defending the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. I suppose most people have seen that. He claims the reason that radical feminists are against that is because they are envious of those beautiful models in the pages of Sports Illustrated. I noticed one response to Andy says, Andy, you missed the point of what we're upset about. But anyway, just to locate Andy for us, he says that we ought to be affirming female beauty. Quotes John Updike as saying that for males, that's the naked female body is the ecstasy of life and the most beautiful thing we'll ever see. And he goes on to say something interesting about that women, for their beloved, and when love stays alive in marriage, even after many years, the husband will say, she grows more beautiful for me. It's probably the way Andy tries to deal with that question of female beauty. That's all by way of locating Andy, and if I locate everybody this completely, we'll never finish this lecture. But anyway, Andy says, all this talk about Catholics being repressed is not true, and he's got all this data and statistics. I give you one in here. Catholics have sex more often than other people in the United States, even more than people who have no religious affiliation. Not only that, but they enjoy it more. And they're more playful at it. And he thinks there's a reason for it. And he thinks it's got to do with the Catholic imagination. That the Catholic imagination sees that God is present in all human activity. That God is present in beautiful bodies and in the sexual embrace. That is a sacrament. That he loves to say this, that one's spouse is a sacrament. Symbol of God's grace. If anyone's ever going to know what it's like to say that God is love, we would know it by those people that we're close to and have intimacy with. So, and he tries to sort of knock down this myth that Catholics walk around repressed. But he has to explain that, and he says the way you explain that is that there's a difference between the official tradition given to us by Augustine and carried on by the popes and the bishops and so on, a tradition that often has been negative on sexuality, and the popular tradition. He said the way Catholics really have learned about sex is more through observance, more through what they see. Michael Novak likes to say that. He says he didn't know there's too much sexual repression walking around in Italy during his student days, as he found in some other countries, maybe of Northern Europe. So there's another tradition, a popular tradition that hands it on. I just flash this. I remember when I was a teenager, we were going someplace, and I was standing with my father. My mother walked out, and my dad said, "Look at your mother. She looks more beautiful than when I married her." That if there's something about the popular tradition, it's carried on in that kind of way. It's carried on very indirectly, in a way that it's even hard to latch on to, probably more by actions and observed behaviors and so on. Well, anyway, we got statistical. I guess the upshot of this is, if you want a good sex life, marry a Catholic. And that's sort of the final conclusion of Andy's book. I mean, he doesn't quite put it that way, but that's... you see some people in the room thinking, yes, I made a wise choice in my life. Without even reading the book, I knew that. Terrific. Well, what I suggest here is when we talk about the sexual realm, the question is, what's the big problem? Is it repressive attitudes? You know, is it because we got people walking around who heard that, you know, sex is negative? Is that the problem? Or is the problem got something to do with the permissive culture in which we live, where we have all these children born out of wedlock? More white children now being, the increase among whites is greater than among blacks being born out of wedlock now. Teenage births. And so is that, you know, what about that? What about the irresponsibility of fathers? You know, some people have said, well, what has happened with the sexual liberation of women is it just gave men license to be more irresponsible and not make commitments, the very thing that they haven't wanted to do all along. Just made it easy for men to not make those kind of commitments. Got all these sexually transmitted diseases, large increases in those. What about that? And I suppose something that we'll want to take up in more detail later on, and that is the problem of the loss of significance in sexuality when it becomes so open and so blatant and so on. Well, I mean, many people would end up saying that this whole idea that, well, geez, this sexual ethic that we get in Christian circles is crummy, it's lousy, it's no good, it just makes people repressed and unhappy, and that gives them guilt feelings. And then we go to that and say, what's the alternative? Well, what's the alternative that's presented to us? Which is, I suppose the cultural ideal says that if two consenting adults want to do it, fine. Well, I mean, that's the rough moral norm that exists in our society today. You shouldn't force somebody into sex, but that's about the only norm that one would find. In the culture, in the dominant TV, Hollywood culture, what you get is sex is fundamentally recreational. So Michael Novak puts it, what do you want, the Catechism or MTV as a guide for how sexuality ought to be lived out? Well, that I'm going to divide my remarks this evening, where we get to this, into three categories. The word sexuality actually came into our vocabulary only, a couple hundred years or so ago. And the word sexuality, as it's commonly used, suggests the whole area of sex from the viewpoint of meaning, of purpose, of deeper elements in it. And I'm distinguishing out, following many other authors, sexuality in three ways. Gender sexuality, males and females, differences. Affective sexuality, or interpersonal sexuality, whole problem of eros, or what it means to be erotic. And finally, the whole question of genital sexuality. So that's a nice framework for looking at the question and beginning to sort it out and see what sense we might make out of it, especially in our situation, what the Christian tradition might say about it that would end up being helpful. Well, on the gender question, do you remember the movie Annie Hall? I'm not remembering it in great detail, but as I'm recalling it, Woody Allen, playing his usual character, goes to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, well, how often do you have sex? He says, it's terrible. I almost never have sex. It's almost a non-entity in our marriage. About 3 times a week. And then his girlfriend goes to her psychiatrist and saying, well, how often do you have sex? It's constant. We have nothing. Sex all the time is all that ever happens. I was all sex about 3 times a week. That's revealing. I mean, there's gender differences. We look at things differently. In the sexual realm, different perspectives on the same event 3 times a week. One looks not enough, to one looks like it's more than one wants to bear. So it raises the whole question of the gender differences. And of course, this is not just an idle thing. When we begin to talk about gender differences, you've got the problem of sexism in the culture, patriarchal culture, and therefore people being treated in unfair ways, injustice existing, and so on. Just one statistic comes from Deborah Tannen, the linguist from Georgetown University. Fortune 500 companies, there's in the top 2,500 jobs, 1% of them are held by women. So if you read that the glass ceiling has disappeared, well, there's probably evidence to suggest otherwise. 1% of 2,500 top jobs. Only 13% of those companies, I think, have over 5% women, something like that, in the top positions. Anyway, we still live in a patriarchal society. And then there's the whole problem of not being able to talk about differences. I've told this story many times, but it still makes the point. In the late 70s, I was in a dialogue with Rosemary Ruther. As people might know, Rosemary is maybe a moderate feminist. Well, maybe some people do know Rosemary, more radical feminist. In the midst of the discussion, I said to Rosemary, who is a biological mother, I said, Rosemary, it seems to me that having a child, giving birth to a child, would influence one's outlook on God, on one's image of God. And Rosemary looked at me and said, bullshit. This is where we were at in the 1970s in terms of sexual differences. I did not sense a great openness on Rosemary's part to discuss the matter. I don't know if I took it too personally or what, but it didn't seem like an invitation to dialogue on this question. Well, I mean, that was the way it was. I mean, to raise sexual differences said, well, that's only, we'll lose. Rosemary told me afterwards, I can't let you shape that conversation because we'll lose. The people on the underside of this thing will always lose if I let you shape the question or set the agenda or set the framework for looking at it. And I think she's fundamentally correct about that. Whoever sets the framework wins the argument. Whoever sets the question. And of course, the great fear among feminists was that if you talked about differences, it would be used stereotypically, and it would be used to put women down and keep them from getting their proper place. When I look at the culture today and what's going on, I suggest maybe 4 models that one might find of how the gender question's being dealt with. One is the standard patriarchal model. Patriarchal model says there are male characteristics and female characteristics, and the male's characteristics gives them sort of right to be in charge because we are more logical and have our emotions under control and are cool under fire. It is better for us to be in charge. Not only that, but things in the Scriptures buttress this, so that we have evangelical Christians saying, that's right, and the Scripture proves it, because just go read Ephesians 5, wives, be subject to your husbands. Husband was set as the head of the wife and ought to be in charge. So that gives us a fundamental patriarchal model that's been in vogue and dominant throughout human history for the most part. Most cultures, most history has been like that. And I noted there are still a few people walking around in the United States who hold that position. It's an operative model. Then comes, I'm calling the radical feminist model. I think that was portrayed most clearly recently by Gloria Steinem. Some of you might have seen the ABC report by John Stossel on sexual differences, and they were bringing up recent research on sexual differences and so on, and Gloria was periodically interviewed throughout the program being upset with this whole thing. I mean, she's upset that the money was given to have this research. And Gloria is saying what Rosemary said a long time ago, that if I let you talk about sexual differences, it's going to be used against us. And it just doesn't exist. The only reason there's any differences is because of the way we raise little kids. So you cuddle little girl babies and you give aggressive toys to boys and throw them up in the air and so on. No wonder they're different. So what you really got to do is try in one way or another to get around that kind of thing. Don't let that happen. Raise children in a gender-neutral way. Well, that becomes what I'd call a radical feminist model. It's interesting. There's anecdotal evidence of parents. I like this. I think it was on that very program. Or Ted Koppel did a program on sexuality also. I forget which was which. But the parents were saying, yeah, we were into this gender-neutral thing, and we bought kids same kind of toys, and let them play with them and so on. First thing we knew, we gave Barbie dolls to the boys. The next thing we knew, they were using them as swords and guns. They have these tests now. They put 6-month-old baby girls, baby boys in front of a screen, and by pulling a cord, they can make new images come on, and they're happy, they're delighted. And then they shut the screen off. 6 months. Majority of girls sit there and cry. The majority of boys keep pulling the string, trying to get that image back on there. Some things never change. I mean, anyway, Gloria didn't like that test, or the fact that money was given to have that test. So that would represent this radical feminist model. And then a model that's been very big in Christian circles and by those influenced by Carl Jung, especially a complementarity model, which says something like this. The problem is with us men, we're not in touch with our feminine side, our anima. We even got a name for it, a Latin name, the anima. And that if we got in touch with the feminine anima inside of us, then we would be better off, so that we would be able to cry in front of women or in any situation. We wouldn't have to be so emotionally repressed, so tight and rigid. And women also have the animus inside of them, and if they got in touch with their more aggressive side, they would be better off and so on. They would get in touch with the masculine side of themselves. And then, at least some cases, the way the model gets played out, you end up with two groups of people, men and women, who are themselves limited, who are themselves not whole, and finding their wholeness by coming together in a loving relationship or in sexual union or in marriage or however. That's the complementarity model of what it, how it seems to work out. Get in touch with the other side and so on. Well, the fourth model, and of course, whoever is giving a lecture always saves the last one, the one they like, So the other model, I really don't know what to name it. I just named it a mutuality model, but this model suggests that as soon as you name characteristics as feminine or masculine, we're all going to lose. To start out by saying that is going to cause us trouble. And that the way to begin the debate or the discussion is to say that human beings, all human beings, are a mixture of different competing tendencies. Aggressiveness and passivity. Just to take one example. That the desire for intimacy and the desire to be independent are found in all human beings. And that healthy human beings figure out how to put those two things together in some holistic way. And when they do, then they're in a position to come together with members of the opposite sex to relate on a basis of mutuality, to relate on a basis of strength and not weakness. I can think of countless young couples that I've counseled and so on. With that specific advice, it seems to me what makes marriages work is when people come to them with their strengths. It doesn't mean we're not wounded or hurting or in need. That's not the point, but it's the strength very often that keeps people going and allows them to continue in the relationship and to make it work. So this model is one of mutuality that says that two people who are, found a way to balance any of the dialectics that go on. I've just chosen one, that is the independence and the intimacy thing. But a person who's sort of put that together in their own mind and heart, who's not just utterly dependent on the other person, nor has built walls to keep the other person out, but has found a way to enter into an interdependent relationship. That's how you get good situations in marriages. It's a mutuality. People can now give and receive in the relationship. Well, I would just suggest as you read different authors and you think about the question, you might look at those four models as a way of trying to make sense out of this gender question. Now, my suggestion is throughout all of this is that the Christian perspective has something to say about all this. And fundamentally what the Christian outlook, I think, says is that we are whole creatures. We are not souls stuck in a body. The body isn't an appendage or something we'd like to get rid of, but that as whole creatures we interact with our God and with other people. That sexuality stamps our whole being, our character, our personality. It's a dimension of what we are. And our bodiliness is absolutely crucial. I am my body. It's also true that I have a body, but I am my body. That's what I am. That's how I interact. That's how we gesture and touch and communicate and so on through our bodiliness. And the Christian outlook has been that God created bodies as much as God created souls or spirits. God's the creator of all of that. And Jesus redeemed bodies as well as souls. In fact, what we say in our creed typically is so helpful on this. We do not say, I believe in the immortality of the soul, do we? We say, I believe in the resurrection of the body. So right in the central creeds, we find this affirmation about the bodiliness being part of the fulfilling plan that God has set out for us. Our bodiliness is not the first stage of a rocket that gets jettisoned as the soul speeds off to heaven, but here's this whole people, and that makes a body support, makes souls Holy Spirit. Anyway, Flannery O'Connor says she never understood the Christian notion of purity till she understood the notion of the resurrection of the body. That's what put it together for her. Resurrection of the body, which suggests fundamental goodness and therefore respect for the body, our own body and bodies of other people. There's two stories of creation in Genesis, side by side. Chapter 1 has one, chapter 2. Chapter 2, I guess, the one we usually go back to, and that says you got a man walking around, and he's not happy with things, and he wants help, needs help desperately. Some things never change, it just goes on. Needs help. And can't find a suitable partner, so the woman's taken out of his rib. Well, he's there already, and she's there as a partner, and it'd be easy to interpret that in sort of a basis of inequality. The other story